Pnawn da a chroeso nôl. Lyned Morgan ydw i. Fi yw Gweinidog Iechyd a Gwasanaethau Cymdeithasol Llywodraeth Cymru. A heddiw yn ymuno gyda mi mae Julie Morgan, y dirprwy Gweinidog Gwasanaethau Cymdeithasol. A heddiw i ni eisiau trafod gofal cymdeithasol yng Nghymru gyda chi a'r datblygiadau diweddaraf o ran brechlyn Covid. I'm going to ask Julie to start with social care and then I'll turn to vaccination. Julie.
Diolch, Lyned. We place enormous value on social care and everyone working in it. This is a large workforce which is often low paid, and they do an incredible job in very difficult circumstances, but they're also exhausted after a very difficult 18 months. Social care provides an important and wide range of services which care for some of the most vulnerable people in our society. We often don't notice it, but without social care, our NHS would struggle to look after the many hundreds of thousands of people who are supported every day in their own homes or in residential and nursing homes. Now, unlike NHS care, social care is not free at the point of need and is not always provided by the state. Most of us will have to pay at least some of the costs of our care, and it's provided by a large and complex network of local authority, independent and private companies. When we talk about social care, we usually think about the care of older people, but social care also includes care for children and for disabled adults. Our long-term work to reform social care was started by my predecessor, Gwenda Thomas, and we've put in place many of the important building blocks. We've changed the law, reformed the way assessments are carried out, introduced registration for the workforce, and capped payment for domiciliary care. We've raised the capital limit, which means people in Wales keep more of their savings and assets before they have to pay for care. Now, social care in Wales is facing a perfect storm of pressures which have come to a head during the pandemic. It's dealing with the pandemic, of course, which has placed extraordinary demands on the workforce. I want to thank our social care colleagues and our army of unpaid carers for all they've done over the last 18 months. Their work has made a real difference to the people they've been caring for. The sector, of course, is also dealing with the consequences of Brexit and the loss of many staff who have returned home. These staffing pressures are being made worse as our economy recovers and other sectors recruit. Many people are choosing to leave social care to work elsewhere. And of course, the workforce is not immune to the current high rates of COVID in our communities. Sickness and isolation are taking their toll on the workforce. We've just finished a national 3-week recruitment campaign, and a jobs portal has been set up on the Social Care Wales website. We're committed to raising wages by implementing the real living wage across this complex sector. This work has started, and I will receive urgent advice from the Social Care Fair Work Forum this month about implementation. And today I've announced a £48 million funding boost for social care to support the sector through the pandemic. 40 million of this will go directly into social care via local authorities. Now, last week, the Prime Minister finally announced the long-term funding arrangements for health and social care in the form of an increase in national insurance contributions. From April 2022, working people will pay 1.25% more in national insurance. From April 2023, this will become a specific health and social care levy. The Prime Minister also announced an immediate uplift in funding for the NHS in England to help deal with the impact of the pandemic. Now, these announcements could mean an extra 600 million a year from 2022. But we will have to wait until later in the autumn in the Comprehensive Spending Review to find out what these announcements really mean for Wales. Because we know that what can be given in one hand by the UK government as a consequential can be very easily and quickly be taken away in another by the Treasury. Decisions about how funding is spent in Wales are made by the Cabinet, but we've always invested in health and social care together in Wales. We will now reconvene the interministerial group on paying for care so we can explore the best possible way to use the additional funding which will come to Wales. This will include our aspiration for a social care service which is free at the point of need, just like our health service. I will now hand over to Eluned, who will bring you the latest news about the vaccination. Eluned.
Diolch yn fawr, Julie. Nawr ddoe cafodd 4 gweinidog iechyd yn y Deyrnas Unedig gyngor a thystiolaeth gan ein 4 prif swyddog meddygol ynghylch darparu brechlynau Covid-19 i bawb rhwng 12 a 15 mlwydd oed. You'll remember that last week the Joint Committee on Vaccinations and Immunisation considered the question of vaccinating all 12 to 15-year-olds and advised against a universal vaccination programme. However, it did recommend the chief medical officers should look at the wider health and well-being benefits of vaccination for this age group. Now, after careful consideration, the chief medical officers have recommended offering children and teenagers in this age group the vaccination based on public health grounds, saying it will help to reduce the disruption to their education. Today I've accepted this advice and we will now begin preparations to invite 12 to 15-year-olds who have not yet been vaccinated to have a first dose of the Pfizer vaccine, and that rollout will start next week. Today we've received the JCVI's final advice about how the booster campaign will be rolled out, and again we will accept this advice. We've been preparing for an autumn booster campaign over the summer. Our NHS is ready to deliver this, and we will start next week by offering a booster vaccine to help people living and working in care homes and frontline health and social care staff the booster vaccine. We'll then offer it to everyone over 50. We'll offer it to all frontline health and social care staff and all those with underlying health conditions, just as we did with the first 2 doses of the vaccine. Vaccination has made a real difference to the course of this pandemic. It has prevented many thousands of people falling seriously ill, and it's prevented many, many deaths in this Delta wave. We have very high rates of vaccination in Wales, thanks to the hard work of everyone involved in our fantastic vaccination programme. But there are many people who could be vaccinated who have not yet had the vaccination. We are particularly worried about pregnant women who haven't been vaccinated, and we'd urge them to speak to their midwife about having the vaccine. Dwi byth yn rhy hwyr I chi gael eich brechu yma yng Nghymru. It's never too late to be vaccinated here in Wales. So please, if you haven't already, come and get your vaccine, and when your invitation arrives, come and get your booster. Diolch yn fawr iawn I chi gyd. Now, Julie and I will take questions from journalists, and I'm going to start with Felicity Evans from BBC Wales.
Thank you very much, Minister. If I could direct these questions to you, please, and I'd be grateful if you could answer in Welsh as well as English. Just first one on the practicalities of offering the vaccine to 12 to 15-year-olds. Will these jabs be delivered in school buildings? And do you foresee problems for schools or clinicians if there's a disagreement between parent and child over consenting to the vaccine?
Well, the vaccinations in schools will be carried out, to children will be carried out in a number of ways. There'll be a blended mix of mass vaccination centres and some school settings. It'll be up to health boards working with local authorities to determine how that will happen. What we are clear about is that those invitations will go out this week, and we will start then vaccinating next week. Sorry, could you repeat the second part of your question?
Yes, it was about consent, really.
Consent, of course.
Yeah, what problems do you foresee if there's disagreement between parent and child?
So the children will be invited generally to mass vaccination centres. Parents will probably accompany their children to those vaccination centres where they will be given details about the pros and cons about getting the vaccination. And then obviously it will be up to the parents and the children together to determine whether they want to receive the vaccine. The process in school will be slightly different. It'll follow the normal process of immunisation that happens within schools, where a letter is sent out to parents. If there is a dispute between the children and the parents, then there is a process to go through. There is a GILIC test, a capacity and competence test, that is determined by the clinicians in terms of whether the child is able to make that decision. So there is a clear process for this to follow that has been tried and tested. By ni yn dechrau ar y broses o cynnig brechlyn erbyn dechrau wythnos nesaf ac wedyn yn sicrhau bod pobl yn gallu cael y brechlyn unai yn ein canolfannau brechlynnu neu yn yr ysgolion. A fydd hi'n benderfyniad I Llywodraeth leol a'r byrdde iechyd I benderfynu pa broses fydd yn cael ei cymryd. O ran rhoi caniatad I os ddyle plentyn cael ei brechlyn, mae yna broses unwaith eto sydd fel arfer yn digwydd. Bydd na gyfle I rhieni I fynd gyda'i plant i'r canolfannau brechlyn lle bydd y gwybodaeth yn cael ei roi ynglyn â'r pros and cons o dderbyn y brechlyn. Os mae plant sydd falle yn cynnig rhywbeth sy'n wahanol i'w rhieni, wedyn mae yna broses I fynd trwy, mae yna brawf o'r enw'r GILIC test, a mae hwnna yn profi os mae'r gallu gan y plentyn I wneud y penderfyniad sydd falle yn mynd yn erbyn penderfyniad y rhieni. Mae hwn yn broses sydd yn digwydd yn gyson.
Diolch. And secondly, also in Welsh and English, please, are you frustrated that this advice didn't come through sooner? Because we're already a week into the school term now, and you are basically running to catch up, aren't you, in terms of the stated aim of minimising disruption to the education this term?
Well, it has taken longer than we'd hoped, but of course what is important is that we've done all the testing. We wanted to wait for the JCVI advice. We wanted to make sure that the chief medical officers had the opportunity to really assess the broader impacts of not having the vaccine. We are probably, if anything, more concerned that it's taken so long to have the advice in relation to the booster programme, because we've been ready to roll with that programme for a number of weeks, so that has been rather frustrating. So we are delighted that we're able now to crack on with that particular programme. Mae hi wedi bod tym bach yn rwystredig I aros am y penderfyniadau hyn yn arbennig. Pan I ni sôn am y rhaglen booster, o'n i'n yn barod I fynd gyda'r rhaglen booster ers cwbl o wythnosau nawr, ond wrth gwrs mae hi'n bwysig I aros tan bod ni'n cael canlyniadau gwyddonol ynglyn â beth yw'r proses a beth yw'r frachlyn orau I roi. Can I ask Charanpreet Kaira, please, from ITV Wales?
Hi there, and my questions will be directed at you as well, please, and I just need an English response if that's okay. First of all, the JCVI previously mentioned the risk to children, albeit a very rare risk, of heart inflammation. If that risk does still exist and the benefits for children of vaccination are marginal, then first of all, is this a decision that prioritises the rest of society over children? And how will you persuade parents to consent to their children being given?
Thanks very much. Just to make it clear that the risks that the JCVI did see, I think they did say that they were finely balanced risks. I think that what has happened is that the chief medical officers have looked at the broader impacts on those children. And I think loss of schooling is a significant impact for children as well, not just in terms of the impact on their mental health, their ability to socialise, but also in terms of the income that they may lose over the course of their lifetime. So we have to consider all of these other issues. And of course, this is not a compulsory vaccination. It will be up to parents and the children themselves to determine if they will take up that opportunity. And I'd just like to underline the fact that we will be making real efforts to make sure that the information that we give out is information that is child-friendly, because it is important that the children understand exactly what is going on here and the risks and benefits that are associated with this vaccine. Sharon, please.
And on the practicalities of the booster vaccine, will over 50s be offered a different vaccine in some cases to the one that they had originally? Will they be mixed and matched? Could you start off by having had Pfizer and then get AZ as your booster vaccine? How will that work?
So the recommendations that have come from the JCVI is that it should be the mRNA vaccine that is used, so either Pfizer or it could be Moderna in some instances. So it will be mostly that, irrespective of what vaccine you had in the first place. The other thing that's probably worth emphasising is that where possible, we will be trying to roll this vaccination programme out at the same time as a flu vaccination programme. We are expecting a significant increase in the number of people suffering from flu this winter. And so that is another consideration. We're trying, where possible, to roll those out simultaneously. Dan Bevan, LBC.
Thank you very much, Minister. Good afternoon to you. Both these questions are going to be more towards yourself, Leonard, but Julie, please feel free to chime in if you feel that you'd like to. Firstly, again, on this jab rollout for 12 to 15-year-olds, I know you've already mentioned about consent, but there is inevitably going to be parents who perhaps have had the jab themselves but are more hesitant about their children having it. What is your message to those parents directly?
My message would be that they do have to balance up the risks and the benefits here, which is why we're not making this mandatory. It is important that everybody makes those decisions themselves. I think another factor that is probably worth people considering is that actually 1 in 7 children, when they contract coronavirus, are able, and we have seen some evidence that they develop long COVID, and that is something that can be quite debilitating for children. So that is something else that they need to consider when they are weighing up this information. The key concern for us, one of the key concerns for us, of course, is that we don't want to disrupt children's schooling any more than it has done already. We've always, as a government, emphasised the importance of getting our children back into school and keeping them in school where possible. We also know that if children do get coronavirus, and it may be that they, even when they've had the vaccine, that it's possible that they may contract it, it is likely to be much, much milder. So that is something else for them to consider. Julie, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Well, basically just to emphasise what Lynette has said about the fact the vaccination is not mandatory. We really want parents and children to talk, and we will be putting forward child-friendly information so that there can be a proper discussion about it.
Thank you both. And changing the topic slightly to the Prime Minister's winter plan that we are expecting to have later on this evening. Are we expecting something similar from the Welsh Government, perhaps from the First Minister on Friday? And have you got any of the key points that you'd like to outline at the moment?
Well, we're waiting to see what the UK government have to say. It's quite possible that what they'll say is things that we already have in place. That is an opportunity to reintroduce face masks into public settings, which is something, of course, we've never done away with, but also the opportunities to work from home if necessary. So those are things that we're expecting to hear this afternoon. We, of course, do have our coronavirus plan already in place. We'll obviously be keeping an eye on whether we need to update that. We will be updating our vaccination programme to take account of the fact that we now have a different programme that we need to be working to in relation to boosters and vaccination for children. So we'll be keeping an eye on things, and of course we are also very clear that there are still considerable pressures on the NHS that we need to keep an eye on, and we are determined to start eating into those very long waiting lists which are causing a lot of people to really suffer at the moment in a lot of pain. Mark Smith, Wales Online.
Thank you very much indeed, both. This is a question for Julie Morgan. You've just mentioned that a national 3-week recruitment campaign has now finished and that a jobs portal set up on the Social Care Wales website. I just want a bit more of an idea of how successful that was. Do you have any figures for how many people actually applied for jobs during that push? And do you also have figures on the number of people who have left their roles as a consequence of Brexit?
Well, we haven't had the full results yet of the recruitment campaign. It's been a very good campaign, and the We Care campaign generally has been very successful in attracting people. But there are actually 700 job vacancies available at the moment, which is a lot of job vacancies. And we're very hopeful that this very intensive recruitment campaign, because we did it at all different levels, a lot of television advertising, we hope that it will produce more applicants, but we don't know the full results yet.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And secondly, a question for you, Health Minister. Based on all the scientific evidence and advice you've received, I mean, what do you believe the next few weeks have in store for us in Wales, both in terms of community transmission and its impact on hospitals? Do you think we're close to the peak of the third wave of coronavirus, or is worse still to come?
So our modelling was suggesting that we would reach a peak towards the end of September, and it would take a couple of weeks then to translate into hospital cases. So we're expecting the pressure to continue on our NHS until at least mid-October. The rolling average at our peak in terms of the pandemic was about 600 cases per 100,000. It's now about 510 cases per 100,000, and it's dropped from about 551 cases. So we're going in the right direction. Whether that's sustained or not, we have yet to see. I think it's also important that we underline the pressure on the NHS. There are now 600 COVID-related patients in our hospitals. We are likely, I'm afraid, to see that going up, which is why we would really urge people to get their vaccination, because we know that the chances of you being hospitalised are massively reduced if you receive a vaccination. Steve Bagnall, Daily Post.
Thank you, Minister. These questions are directed to you, please. With the booster campaign, are other age groups being considered at this stage? And if so, can you give any details, please?
Well, at the moment, the booster campaign will be targeted at those groups, what we called 1 to 9. So there'll be mostly people who are in care homes, people who work after people in care homes, look after people in care homes. It'll be our NHS workers. It'll be people who are vulnerable, and it'll be people over the age of 50. And of course, there'll be an order to that. That is the recommendation from the JCV, and we'll be keeping to that recommendation. Obviously, they will be assessing what's going on globally, and they'll be keeping an eye on that situation, as will we.
Thank you, Minister. You've touched on this. In our area, 4 hospitals recently restricted access, with people only allowed to enter them if absolutely necessary. This was amid a rising COVID cases. How concerning is this? And is this a precursor to more measures, possibly even lockdowns, having to be introduced as the autumn and winter months progress?
If we can avoid future lockdowns, and of course we will, but I'm certainly not going to make any promises, because it is important that we understand that this is still a pandemic, that we're in a situation where we can't be assured of what's around the corner. So we will always keep that option on the table, I think it is really important for people to understand that we are determined to try and reduce the amount of transmission of COVID within hospitals. And when there's so much COVID within our communities, then obviously every time somebody goes into a hospital, there is a risk that somebody is carrying that into our hospital. So this is a protection measure against people who are already very vulnerable in our hospitals. So it's understandable that those restrictions have been introduced. Of course, we need to be really sensitive, which is why there are exceptions to those situations. But on the whole, I think it's important that people understand we are still in a very, very difficult and precarious situation in relation to this virus. I'm going to go now to India Pollock, BBC Wales.
Hello. If I could have an answer in English and Welsh, but these questions are directed to Deputy Minister Julie. Now, the social care sector has welcomed this additional money today, but says they still need a plan for long-term funding as soon as possible. And the word crisis was used long before the pandemic. The UK government has announced its plan on funding. Why are we still waiting here in Wales while there is still such an urgency for long-term sustainable funding?
Well, there are two issues here. First of all, we've got the immediate crisis in social care, and that's what we're working at with short-term efforts to try to stem the immediate crisis. But then we do have the longer-term plan. We're in a better position now because we know what's happening with the UK government. We know that we're likely to get 600 million a year. But that, of course, is dependent on the spending review, so we haven't really got the actual figures, but we're further on than we were, and we know what sort of architecture will happen in England. We've worked very closely on this issue for many years, actually, through our interministerial group on paying for social care, and we are reconvening that group. This money is not becoming available immediately, so we want to take our time to look at all the different options available to see what we see as a long-term plan for social care. So we are going to start doing that immediately.
Just i gyfieithu hynna, wrth gwrs mae yna broblemau tymor byr, i ni'n canolbwyntio arnyn nhw ar hyn o bryd i sicrhau bod ni'n mynd trwy'r gaeaf ac yn gallu wneud lot fwy ynglyn â'r sefyllfa i ni gweld gyda gofal ar hyn o bryd. Ond mae yna ymdrechion nawr wedi dechrau oherwydd bod ni gyda gwell syniad o beth fydd y dyfodol yn edrych fel. I ni'n ymwybodol fydd tua 6 miliwn yn dod i Gymru oherwydd cyhoeddiadau oedd wedi cael ei wneud yn Lloegr yr wythnos diwetha. I ni'n gwybod rhywfaint ynglyn â'r pensaerniaeth fydd yn bodoli yn Lloegr. Mae'n rhaid i ni wedyn benderfynu beth i ni eisiau gweld fel ein blaenoriaethau ni. Dyn ni ddim yn hollol siŵr o os fydd na ymdrech i gymryd arian yn ôl yn ystod y cyllideb fydd yn dod o Llywodraeth Ganolog yn Sant Steffan yn yr Hydref, ond beth i ni wedi dechrau yw ail ymgynnull y grŵp rhyngweinidogol i edrych ar sut i ni'n mynd i fod yn ariannu gofal yn y tymor hir.
Thank you very much. And how far does this money go in addressing the crisis in recruiting and retaining staff? I know you mentioned the recent campaign, but to what extent will it help with the current problems that we're seeing immediately with delayed transfers of care from hospitals into care at home?
This money will not be available immediately. The extra payment on national insurance will not be starting till next year, next April, and obviously won't be immediately available then. So we don't have that to deal with the immediate pressures. But we are addressing the immediate pressures. We have, and I've announced £48 million today to go to the providers. 40 million of that will go to the local authorities, and we'll also be having additional special grants to help carers. Unpaid carers are a very important part of this equation. So we are giving money now to try to help stem what has been a flow out of social care, and we want, with our recruitment campaign, to let people know that this is a fantastic job. Looking after vulnerable people, older people, people who are disabled, is one of the most important jobs that can be done. And so we want to make the public recognise that these jobs are so important, and we are putting in financial means to help that. But we are struggling, because people are leaving the sector, with hospitality opening up and with retail opening up, and with the pay that is low in the social care sector, people are attracted to other areas. So it is a difficult time, but we are also committed to pay the real living wage to all social care workers.
Fel oedd Julie'n gweud, fydd yr arian ddim ar gael oddi wrth trysorlus tan mis Ebrill flwyddyn nesaf, ond i ni eisoes wedi cyhoeddi bydd na 48 miliwn o bunnau yn ychwanegol i fynd i'r afel a'r broblem o ran gofal y flwyddyn yma. Bydd peth o'r arian yma yn mynd tuag at Llywodraeth leol i sicrhau bod nhw yn gallu rhoi mesurau mewn lle i fynd i'r afel a'r broblem, a hefyd i helpu i roi fwy o gymorth i'r gwirfoddolwyr sydd yn gofalwyr hefyd. Mae'r swydd yma yn swydd sy'n bwysig, yn swydd sydd yn wirioneddol yn helpu pobl sydd mewn sefyllfa bregus. Mae'n wir fod lot o bobl wedi gadael y sector yn ystod y misoedd diwetha, ond mae hi, o ran Llywodraeth Cymru, ni bod yn glir ein bod ni eisiau talu cyflog teg a cyflog byw i'r bobl sy'n gweithio yn y sector, a bydd ni'n gweithio tuag at hynny yn ystod yr wythnosau a misoedd a'r blynyddoedd nesaf. Lily Hewitson.
Thank you, Minister. Both of these questions are for you. Do you intend for 12 to 15-year-old children to have just the one vaccine or both? And how will it work if there's an outbreak in the classroom? Will vaccinated children not have to isolate?
Thank you. We will be following the advice of the JCVI in relation to the vaccine. At the moment, they are only recommending one vaccine for those people. If there is an outbreak in the classroom, then obviously we already have a framework in place for that situation. They will be contacted by our Test, Trace and Protect officials, who will make sure that they perhaps follow up the closest contacts of those people. So that framework is already in place. But I don't think we'll be seeing a need in future for us to send whole year groups home. That's certainly what we're trying to avoid.
Thank you. And secondly, you've spoken about a winter plan. The two components you've mentioned are the booster campaign and vaccinating children. Will the success of the vaccination programme here in Wales mean that we won't be seeing things like firebreak lockdowns now come the winter time?
As I said earlier, Lily, I don't want to give any guarantees or assurances because we simply don't know what this coronavirus has in store for us. It could be that we see a new variant and we have to reassess the situation. So we do need to keep an eye on the situation. We're still waiting to see the impact of children going back to school. Obviously, we have students starting back next week. All of these things are in the mix, so it's very difficult for us to be absolutely sure in terms of our predictions. So we'll always keep that option open for us on the table, but it will very much be a last resort in the sense that we are in a very different situation from where we were last year, where we have incredibly high numbers of vaccinated people in our communities now. 91% of people in Wales have had a first dose, 84% a second dose. These are really high levels, but we do need anybody who hasn't been vaccinated to come forward, because the chances are, if you haven't, you will, with these rates of coronavirus, you're likely to be infected. So you need to take precautions to support and to help yourself. Tom Owen, The National.
Right. If I can ask for some clarity on the 40 million announced for local authorities, and if you can answer whoever you feel is appropriate. But if you could give a little bit of clarity on what that money will be used for and what different service users or staff we'll see as a result of that investment? Is it money that is primarily going to be used to recruit and retain existing staff by boosting pay, or is there going to be some other outcome from that money? And obviously, Care for in Wales, which speaks for private providers, has suggested the money shouldn't have all gone directly to local authorities.
Yeah. Well, in addition to the 40 million going to local authorities, we are also putting in 8 million, as I said, to particularly help carers, older people. So there is that additional money that is not going to the local authorities. But the local authorities have the responsibility for care in the community, for the care that is provided to individual residents of their authorities in homes, which are mainly in the independent sector. So it's absolutely right that the 40,000 goes to the local authorities, but that money is intended to deal with the pressures that they have had to experience during the pandemic. I mean, during the pandemic, we've given the hardship fund to local authorities, which has given an uplift to pay for care packages, and which has also paid for voids in care homes, which has been very much welcomed by Care for in Wales, because it means that we've managed to keep care homes afloat during this pandemic. So I don't think during the pandemic we've had one care home that is closed because of the pandemic in terms of not being able to cope, and that is certainly different from what's happened over the border. So it is up to the local authorities to use that money with their knowledge of local circumstances to support the workforce. In terms of a pay increase, we were committed in our programme for government to paying the real living wage to social care workers, and we've set up the Social Care Fair Work Forum, which is going to urgently advise me next month about how we're going to start introducing that uplift to pay for the social care workforce.
So would that require extra on top of that 40 million to meet the pay?
Well, we've given, a commitment apart from that 40 million that we will be paying the real living wage. I mean, some local authorities already pay the real living wage, so there's nothing to stop local authorities, raising what they individually do for their care packages. But we are committed to seeing everybody has the real living wage.
And just to add to that, the pressures at the moment are significant, and the fact is that because we're unable to command more people and to get more people into our care services. At the moment, there are over 1,000 people in our hospitals who could be discharged, and obviously that is creating problems for our NHS services. That's why we're having weekly meetings, both Julie and I, with local authorities and health boards to try and see what we can do to get a much better flow through our system and get those people out back to their homes with the support that they need as soon as possible. Tom Magnam.
Tom Magnam from Carers Worldwide. Thank you very much indeed, Minister. Happy to hear from either or both of you on each of the questions. Can I just pick up on that last comment about effectively trusting local authorities to spend the £40 million wisely? That's 1.8 million each if you share it equally. Our viewers are astonished but not surprised by what they and the Conservative opposition in the Senate have described as a financial drop in the ocean with this money. We all know that 96% of care in Wales is provided by unpaid carers. Yet our viewers see what they say, or what they tell me, is little if any priority effort put into addressing the day-to-day, hour-to-hour physical health, mental health and social care concerns of unpaid carers. What specific priority action for them will you now commit to delivering this autumn?
Well, unpaid carers, as you say, are the backbone of provision in Wales, and we want to pay tribute to the absolute hard work, and we know that the pandemic has been very difficult for unpaid carers, and many of them have dispensed with the help that they were having, or have not been able to access day centres, for example. People coming into their homes, they've been worried about infection, so there has been a huge burden on unpaid carers, and we absolutely recognise that. In the money that we give to local authorities. We give money to help unpaid carers have respite and to generally support them. That is in the money that we give to local authorities. But we have recognised the particular needs of unpaid carers. We've set up a hardship fund, which during the pandemic was, I've committed in this statement today to £1 million for a hardship fund, which gives small grants up to £300 and which has been very well used by carers and very much appreciated. We've also commissioned a report about respite, and we do plan to look at the whole respite scene. We've committed an additional £3 million to make sure that the sort of respite that we provide is what carers want. So we do recognise the really hard work and the dedication of our unpaid carers in Wales.
Thank you very much indeed for that answer. Without wishing to appear rude, unpaid carers are beyond the point of being praised. They really want to see some serious action. That's what they tell us on a daily basis. Do both of you feel proud of prioritising paid care workers over the vast majority who are unpaid carers? Thank you.
I don't think we are prioritising the needs of paid carers over unpaid carers. We absolutely recognise that they both play, a tremendous role. We're obviously at a recruitment, we've got a recruitment problem with paid carers. Unpaid carers are so dedicated that we want to do what we can to support them in the roles that they fulfil with their loved ones. And we work very, very closely with the bodies that represent unpaid carers. And in fact, through the whole of the pandemic, we made decisions jointly about the best things that we could do. And we've, met unpaid carers regularly. I met unpaid carers yesterday and have tried to keep a very close dialogue with them. But I know there is a lot more that we can do, and we are committed to doing all that we can to help them.
I've got to just add to that, Tom. There is no greater champion in the Welsh Government in terms of people speaking up for unpaid carers than Julie Morgan, the Minister. In every single meeting, she draws attention to the heroic work that is done day in, day out by these unpaid care helpers. And I think it's really important for people to understand that as long as this recruitment issue continues, there will be more unpaid carers. There will be more people who will have to take up that responsibility of looking after the people within their own families. Because if we simply can't do it as a government, then we will have to take responsibility as individuals. We don't want to get to that point, but that's where we will be getting to unless we're able to recruit more. So this recruitment campaign is absolutely crucial. We are asking people in Wales to step forward, to step up. Your country needs you now to help us out in this very, very difficult situation. Andrew Nuttall.
Thank you, Minister. So in recent days, planned surgeries have been postponed at our health board here in North Wales in Cynhadledd. But we've had concerns raised that this is simply going to create a domino effect. By cancelling things now, the pressure that's already mounting on the NHS will be sort of kept at a level that it is. It's rather pausing it rather than tackling it. Can you make comment on this and possibly say what will be done to help health boards that may need to make this decision make the best use of the time?
Well, thanks very much, Andrew. We are very aware of the extreme pressures that the Health Board is under. I visited the Health Board in Cynhadledd last week, was able to speak to some of the staff who have been doing heroic work during the pandemic. They were really at pains to describe to me the pressures that they are under, the fact that they really are getting to the point now where they are exhausted. I think we all need to take note of that, which is why we would urge people not to go to accident and emergency and not to go to their GPs unless it is essential. Of course, if we are in a situation, however, where There are extreme accidents where we absolutely need people to have that emergency provision. Then, of course, that does need to be prioritised, which is why that planned care then is pushed back. Clearly, we are very, very anxious to start tackling, and we have been tackling the backlog that has built up during the pandemic. As I say, I'm hoping that the pressure will start to ease off in mid-October and we'll be in a different situation by then.
Thank you. And moving on, another sort of crisis, if you want to use that word, that has been spoken about quite regularly in our North Wales area is a shortage of access to GPs, which has only been heightened due to the pandemic. It's been an issue for quite a few months now that we've noticed. But what can Welsh Government do to actively reduce the pressures that are building up because of this shortage? I think that it kind of goes hand in hand, that people don't really have a place to turn to.
Well, I think that GPs have done some heroic work during this pandemic as well. They've worked in a very different way than they have done traditionally. I think it's really important that people understand that it's highly unlikely that we'll go back entirely to the system that existed pre-pandemic. E-consult has been highly successful, but of course there are always people who would rather see their GPs face-to-face, and we just need to make provision for that when that's appropriate. I was very fortunate to visit some GP surgery in Nevin last week, where they have been doing very innovative work, and also in Prestatyn, where what is important, I think, is for people to understand that they won't always get to see a GP. There are other people who sometimes it's more appropriate for them to go and see. But also, I think people need to think about alternatives that they can use, including community pharmacies, which also can give a significant and important service in our communities. Diolch yn fawr iawn i chi.